Portland, Oregon, 2018. When 35-year-old Michael Chen married Emma Walsh after a whirlwind romance, he never questioned why she had no childhood photos, no old friends, and no family to invite to their wedding. Her past, she said, was too painful to discuss. For 3 years, he respected her silence, until a random internet search for vintage wedding photography led him to a gallery titled Portland Weddings 1987. There, among faded Polaroids and big-haired brides, he found his wife's face staring back at him, unchanged and impossible, standing beside a groom who wasn't him, in a wedding that happened 8 years before she was supposedly born. Chapter 1. The Woman with No Yesterday. Michael Chen first saw Emma Walsh on a Tuesday morning in October 2015 at a coffee shop in Portland's Pearl District. She sat alone near the window, reading a worn paperback with no dust jacket, her fingers tracing the pages like she was memorizing something sacred. When she looked up and their eyes met, something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that felt both impossible and inevitable. Their courtship unfolded with the kind of intensity that makes people forget to ask practical questions. Emma spoke about literature and philosophy with startling depth, recommending obscure poets and authors Michael had never encountered. She knew the city's hidden gardens and forgotten bookstores, places that seemed to exist outside of time. Her laughter came easily, genuine and unguarded, and when she touched his hand across a dinner table 6 weeks later, he felt like he'd been waiting his entire life for that moment. But Emma existed in a perpetual present tense. She never mentioned her childhood, never shared stories about high school friendships or college adventures. When Michael asked about her family, her eyes would dim slightly, and she'd redirect the conversation with practiced ease. Her past, she explained simply, was too painful to revisit. She'd lost people, endured things she wasn't ready to discuss, and needed him to respect that boundary. Michael, believing himself compassionate and patient, agreed without pushing further. Their wedding in spring 2016 was intimate, just the two of them, a judge, and Emma's co-worker from the library where she worked. No relatives on either side, which Emma explained away by saying she'd grown apart from her family years ago. Michael's own parents had passed away in his 20s, so the absence of family felt symmetrical, almost poetic in its loneliness. They exchanged vows in a small courthouse ceremony, sealed their promises with simple gold bands, and began building their life together. The red flags existed, but Michael rationalized each one with the ease of someone who didn't want to see them. Emma's social media presence began in 2015. No embarrassing high school photos, no college party pictures, no digital footprint before the year they met. Her driver's license had been issued that same year, which she explained by saying she'd lived in New York previously and never needed to drive. Her passport looked pristine, barely used, obtained just months before they met for a work trip that never materialized. Michael told himself that plenty of people reinvented themselves, that her desire for privacy was admirable in an age of oversharing. He focused instead on the life they were creating. Their small apartment with exposed brick walls, weekend trips to the coast, evenings spent cooking together while she told him about the library patrons and their peculiar book requests. Emma was attentive and present, remembering every detail he shared about his work as a graphic designer, supporting his creative projects with genuine enthusiasm. She loved old films and farmers markets, preferred handwritten letters to text messages, and knew how to fix almost anything with patience and determination. She was real in every way that mattered, except for the vast, empty space where her history should have been. Michael learned to navigate around that void, to build their relationship on the solid ground of shared present moments rather than excavated past experiences. For 3 years, this arrangement worked. Michael convinced himself that loving someone meant accepting their mysteries, that Emma's reluctance to discuss her past was simply her way of protecting herself from old wounds. He stopped asking questions, stopped wondering why she flinched when strangers took photos, and stopped noticing how she always paid in cash and never used her full name on restaurant reservations. Until one random Tuesday night, when curiosity and algorithms conspired to shatter everything he thought he knew. Chapter 2. The Impossible Photograph. The discovery came during one of those restless nights when sleep refuses to arrive. Michael sat at their kitchen table at 11:30 on a Tuesday evening, laptop glowing in the darkness while Emma slept soundly in their bedroom. His colleague's sister was getting married and wanted a vintage aesthetic for her wedding photos, something with the grainy authenticity of film photography from the 80s. Michael, always thorough in his design research, had volunteered to compile inspiration boards. He clicked through countless websites dedicated to vintage wedding photography, scrolling past big hair and shoulder pads, past pastel tuxedos and elaborate floral arrangements. The images blurred together in a nostalgic haze of decades-old joy. Then he found a small photography blog maintained by an estate sale company in Seattle, dedicated to preserving found photographs from deceased photographers' collections. The post was titled Portland Area Weddings 1985 to 1990, a lost archive. Michael clicked without thinking, drawn by the local connection. The gallery loaded slowly, image by image, each photograph a time capsule of Reagan-era romance. He scrolled casually, his designer's eye noting composition and lighting, until his hand froze on the trackpad. The photograph showed a young bride and groom standing outside a white church with a distinctive arched entrance. The bride wore a dress with puffy sleeves and a long veil, her dark hair styled in soft curls that framed her face. She was smiling directly at the camera with an expression that Michael recognized instantly because he'd seen it across breakfast tables and in morning light and in quiet moments when she thought no one was watching. His wife's face. Emma's face, exactly as it appeared now. Michael's first instinct was dismissal. The resemblance was uncanny, certainly, but people had doppelgangers. The world was full of faces that echoed other faces across time and distance. He started to scroll past, but something made him stop and zoom in closer. The bride's left wrist, visible as she held her bouquet, bore a distinctive birthmark, a small crescent moon shape that Michael had traced with his fingers countless times on Emma's skin. His heart began hammering against his ribs. He read the caption beneath the photo, Daniel and Emma Garrison, wedding at Riverside Community Church, Portland, Oregon, June 13, 1987. Photographer, Robert Finch. The mathematical impossibility crashed into his consciousness like a physical force. Emma had told him she was born in 1983, which would make her 35 years old now, in 2018. But this photograph was taken in 1987, meaning the bride in this image would have been 4 years old at her own wedding. Unless Emma had lied about her age. Unless she was actually much older. Unless this wasn't her at all, despite the identical face and the identical birthmark and the identical name. Michael took screenshots frantically, his hands shaking as he captured every angle and detail. He zoomed in on a groom, a tall man with blonde hair and a kind smile, someone he'd never seen before. He examined the church's architecture, noting its unique features, then opened another browser tab and began searching for Riverside Community Church in Portland. The search results confirmed what some deep instinct had already told him. The church had burned down in December 1991, destroyed completely in an electrical fire. The lot remained empty for years before being converted into a community garden. Michael had passed that garden dozens of times, never knowing what stood there before. He clicked back to the photography blog and scrolled through the About section with trembling fingers. Robert Finch, the photographer, had died in 1995, and his collection of wedding photographs had been discovered in a storage unit during an estate sale in 2017. The blog curator had spent months digitizing and posting the images, hoping to reunite people with lost memories of their special days. Michael searched for Daniel Garrison's name next, adding Portland and the year 1987 to narrow results. The obituary appeared on the third page of search results. Daniel James Garrison, age 34, had died in a car accident in March 1989, leaving behind his wife Emma and no children. The funeral service had been held at a location that no longer existed. Michael sat back in his chair, staring at the glowing screen while his mind raced through impossible scenarios. The woman sleeping in his bedroom claimed to be 35 years old. But the woman in this photograph, with her identical face and name and birthmark, had married someone else 31 years ago. The math didn't work. The timeline couldn't exist. Yet the evidence sat undeniable before him, preserved in pixels and archived on the internet for anyone to stumble across. He looked toward their closed bedroom door, hearing Emma's soft breathing from within. Who was the woman he'd married? And how could she possibly exist in two different timelines simultaneously? Chapter 3. Confrontation and Revelation. Michael didn't sleep. He sat at that kitchen table until dawn broke pale and gray over Portland, the laptop screen burning his retinas while he compiled evidence he wished didn't exist. By the time Emma emerged from their bedroom at 6:30, her hair still messy from sleep, he had printed the photograph and arranged it beside her current driver's license on the table like exhibits in a trial. She stopped in the doorway when she saw his face. The coffee mug in her hand trembled slightly, and Michael watched recognition flicker across her features. Not confusion about what he'd found, but resignation that he'd finally found it. That reaction alone confirmed everything. Her first response was instinctive denial. She insisted the resemblance was coincidental, that plenty of people shared similar features and birthmarks. But her voice lacked conviction, and when Michael placed the zoomed-in image of the bride's wrist beside her own arm, showing the identical crescent-shaped mark, her protest dissolved into heavy silence. She sank into the chair across from him, shoulders curving inward like she was trying to make herself smaller. The truth emerged slowly, painfully, like extracting shrapnel from an old wound. Emma's real name was indeed Emma, but her surname had been Garrison, then briefly Morrison, before finally becoming Walsh. She wasn't 35 years old. She was 54. The photograph was real. The wedding had happened, and Daniel Garrison had been her first husband, a man she'd loved before everything shattered. Michael listened while his understanding of reality restructured itself around each revelation. Emma explained how Daniel's death in 1989 hadn't been a simple car accident, but a targeted hit that she'd witnessed from their living room window. Daniel had worked as an accountant for what he believed was a legitimate shipping company, but had discovered evidence of large-scale money laundering tied to organized crime networks. He planned to turn over his findings to federal authorities. He never got the chance. Emma had seen the men who killed him. She'd memorized faces and license plates in those terrible moments before survival instinct kicked in and she fled through their back door. The U.S. Marshal Service had found her 3 days later, hiding in a motel room in Salem, and offered her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: testify and enter witness protection, or spend the rest of her short life looking over her shoulder. She testified. The trial resulted in multiple convictions, and Emma Garrison disappeared into the bureaucratic machinery of WITSEC, emerging months later with a new birth date, new history, and new documentation that erased 54 years of existence and replaced them with a fabricated 32. The marshals had advised her to avoid relationships, to maintain distance from anyone who might ask too many questions. She'd followed that advice for years, moving between cities, working temporary jobs, living like a ghost, haunting her own life, until she met Michael and made the catastrophic decision to want something real again. She'd convinced herself that enough time had passed, that the people who wanted her dead had moved on or died themselves, that she could have one genuine thing in a life built entirely on lies. The photograph's appearance on the internet was the result of Robert Finch's estate sale, a random collection of negatives purchased by someone who thought they were preserving history, unknowingly posting evidence that could unravel her entire constructed identity. Michael absorbed all of this while watching the woman he thought he knew reveal herself as someone fundamentally different. She was 2 decades older than he believed. She carried trauma and history that made his own life feel shallow by comparison. She'd lied about everything quantifiable: age, past, identity, while somehow remaining truthful about everything that actually mattered between them. The anger came and went in waves, tangled with compassion and betrayal and a love that didn't know how to simply disappear just because the foundation beneath it had cracked. Emma offered to leave, to file for annulment, to remove herself from his life as cleanly as she'd entered it. She apologized for the selfishness of wanting normalcy badly enough to risk his safety, for building their marriage on fabrications she knew would eventually collapse. Michael sat across from her at that table, looking at a face he recognized and a person he was only beginning to understand, and couldn't find words adequate for the impossible question hanging between them. How do you love someone when everything you knew about them was carefully constructed fiction? Chapter 4. Choosing Truth Over Illusion. Michael moved into their guest room that same morning. The physical distance was necessary, not from anger, but from the overwhelming need to think clearly. Emma respected the boundary without protest, moving through their apartment like a cautious visitor in a space she no longer had permission to fully inhabit. The following days passed in strange suspension. They maintained civil routines, coffee made in silence, careful navigation around each other in the kitchen, polite exchanges about mundane necessities. Michael took a week off work and spent his days piecing together verification of Emma's impossible story. He couldn't contact the U.S. Marshal Service directly without potentially endangering her, but he researched the trial she'd mentioned. Hours of digging through newspaper archives from 1989 and 1990 revealed a major organized crime case involving a shipping company called Pacific Maritime Transport. A key witness, identified only as Witness E in court documents, had provided testimony that resulted in multiple convictions. Daniel Garrison's obituary aligned with the dates she'd given. The pieces fit together with uncomfortable precision. Emma answered every question he asked with what appeared to be complete honesty. She showed him the small scars on her body, each with its own story from a life he'd never known. She shared photographs she'd kept hidden despite explicit warnings to destroy everything from her previous life. Images of her real parents who'd died before she entered protection, pictures of Daniel that she'd smuggled through multiple identity changes. One evening, 2 weeks after the discovery, Michael found her packing a suitcase in their bedroom. She explained, without emotion, that she'd contacted an attorney about annulment proceedings and had found a temporary apartment across town. She refused to let him sacrifice his future for her past. She'd been selfish once by marrying him under false pretenses. She wouldn't compound that mistake by forcing him to navigate the consequences of her choices. Michael watched her fold clothes with methodical precision and realized something fundamental. The woman standing before him, careful and broken and trying to do the right thing despite it destroying her, was the same person who'd brought him coffee on difficult mornings, who'd supported his creative projects without judgment, who'd built a life with him through 3 years of accumulated ordinary moments. Her birth date had changed, but the essential person remained constant. He asked her a single question that cut through all the complexity. If they started over right now, with complete honesty, would she choose him again? Emma's answer came without hesitation. She would choose him every time, knowing it was selfish and dangerous and unfair to burden him with the weight of her hidden history. Michael took the shirt from her hands and placed it back in the drawer. They talked through the night, and Emma shared stories she'd kept locked away for decades. She described her childhood in a small Oregon town, her parents' bookstore, the poetry she'd written in college, her dreams before everything collapsed into survival. Michael listened to her real voice, the complete person with 54 years of experiences, losses, and resilience. The decision arrived gradually as recognition that love wasn't about perfect beginnings or unblemished histories. It was about choosing someone despite the complications, accepting both the person they presented and the concealed truths beneath constructed surfaces. 3 months later, they renewed their vows with Emma's real name and real age written on the documents. Through careful legal channels, Emma worked with federal authorities to remove the wedding photographs from the internet. The images disappeared from public view, becoming once again what they should have been, private memories from a life that existed before everything changed. 5 years later, they discovered that truth, even when painful and complicated, created stronger foundations than comfortable fictions ever could. Their marriage began with mystery and rebuilt itself through the harder work of complete honesty. And somehow, that made every ordinary moment feel like a small miracle they'd earned rather than stumbled into by accident. Sometimes the person we love carries secrets we never imagined, and we have to decide if the truth changes who they really are. Michael discovered that his wife wasn't just hiding her past. She was living a completely different life with a different age, a different history, and wounds so deep they required a new identity to survive. But here's the real question. Was Emma lying, or was she simply trying to protect the life she'd built from the ashes of everything she'd lost? Think about it for a moment. Emma had witnessed her husband's murder. She'd testified against dangerous criminals who wanted her dead. The government gave her a new birth date, a new history, and told her to never look back. For years, she followed those rules perfectly, living like a ghost haunting her own existence. Then she met Michael, and for the first time since 1989, she wanted something real. She wanted to be loved not as a witness protection identity, but as a person. Was that selfish? Absolutely. Was it understandable? Maybe that's for you to decide. But here's what gets me about this story, Michael's choice. He didn't just discover his wife was older than she claimed. He found out that literally everything he knew about her timeline was fabricated. The woman he thought was 35 was actually 54. She'd been married before, witnessed a murder, lived an entire lifetime that she'd never shared. Most people would feel betrayed beyond repair. Most people would walk away and never look back. And honestly, that would be completely justified. But Michael didn't do that. He took time, yes. He processed the betrayal, absolutely. He moved into the guest room and questioned everything about their relationship. But then he did something remarkable. He looked past the lies about dates and ages and saw the truth underneath. The woman who brought him coffee on hard mornings was real. The person who supported his creative work was genuine. Her love, despite being built on a false foundation, was authentic. Love isn't always about perfect honesty from the start. Sometimes it's about choosing someone even after you've seen every broken piece they try to hide. Michael could have walked away the moment he found that photograph. Instead, he chose to rebuild their foundation on truth instead of comfortable illusions. That takes a different kind of courage, the kind that says, I see all of you now, and I'm still choosing to stay. And here's something else to consider. How many of us are completely honest about our pasts when we start dating someone? Sure, most of us aren't in witness protection with fabricated identities, but we all curate our histories a little bit, don't we? We downplay past relationships, minimize our mistakes, and hide the parts of ourselves we think might make us unlovable. Emma just took it to an extreme level out of necessity and survival. The bigger question this story raises is about identity itself. Who are we really? Are we the sum of our legal documents, birth dates, social security numbers, official records? Or are we the accumulated moments of kindness, the choices we make every day, the love we give to the people around us? Emma's passport said one thing, but her actions over 3 years of marriage said something else entirely. Which version was the real Emma? Michael had to answer that question for himself, and he decided that the woman he'd fallen in love with in that coffee shop, mysterious past and all, was real enough. The rest was just paperwork and painful history. Their story didn't end with the discovery of her secret. It began again with both of them choosing radical honesty and acceptance. If this story about choosing love over perfection moved you, hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments, would you have stayed or walked away? Could you love someone whose entire past was a carefully constructed fiction? At what point does a lie become too big to forgive? And what would be your breaking point? The age difference, the fake identity, the hidden trauma, or something else entirely? More importantly, do you think Emma was wrong to marry Michael while hiding her true identity? Was it fair to let him fall in love with someone who didn't legally exist the way she presented herself? Or was she entitled to a chance at happiness after everything she'd survived? These aren't easy questions, and I don't think there are simple right or wrong answers. Drop your thoughts below because I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. Would you be Team Michael, choosing to stay and rebuild? Or would the betrayal be too deep to overcome? Let me know in the comments, and let's have a real conversation about love, truth, and whether happily ever after can survive the weight of necessary secrets. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story where we'll explore another mystery that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you.